Hello, good people. It's Professor Wachtel. The topic of this discussion is, what is philosophy? The philosopher Anthony Gottlieb tells a story about a philosopher who gets on an airplane. It sounds a little like a joke. Philosopher gets on an airplane, strikes up a conversation with the guy in the next seat. Actually, it's really not a joke. It's just a funny little story. The two seatmates make some chit-chat. Hey, man, what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a philosopher, Gottlieb says. The seatmate says, oh yeah? What are some of your sayings? Now, philosophers get a laugh out of this story. The reason that philosophers get a laugh out of this story is because this seems to be part of the expectation of philosophers. What they do is they just say these pithy little memorable statements that are supposed to do what? Enlighten us with just basically a tweet. It almost sounds like the seatmate's expectation is that the philosopher is the person who writes the sentence or two of text that goes into a fortune cookie. This is not what philosophers do. So let's think a little bit about what philosophers actually do. Perhaps a good place to start thinking about what philosophers do is by examining the word philosophy. The word philosophy has two roots. There is, to put it in the language of somebody who is not conversant in Greek, the phil part and the sophi part. Think of some phil words, some words that use phil as a prefix or a suffix. Perhaps the most well-known would be the name of the city in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. What is Philadelphia known as? The city of brotherly love. What are some other phil words? Well, what is the name of a person who collects stamps? This would be the philatelist, the lover of somewhat rarely used pieces of paper postage. Rarely used, at least these days. Stamp collecting used to be a really big thing, and I guess it still is among many people. Other phil words. Philanthropist. What does a philanthropist do? A lot of people think of a philanthropist as somebody who donates money, and yes, that's true, but specifically to a certain kind of cause. The anthropos part indicates humans. A philanthropist is a lover of humanity, and thus one who gives his or her wealth for the benefit of humanity. What about an Anglophile? This would be a lover of English culture. A Francophile would be a lover of French culture. There's a pattern emerging. Phil words are love words. So it's reasonable to think that philosophy is the love of something. But what? At this point, perhaps you might want to think about your friend Sophia. Everybody has a friend Sophia, right? Or an aunt Sophia. Doesn't have to be an aunt. Any relative will do. Your friend or relative Sophia. What does her name mean? In Greek, Sophia means wisdom. So if we put the two parts of the word philosophy together, love of wisdom, we start to have a clue about what philosophy aims at. Now you might say, well, how is that so different than little sayings? Well, consider this. Is wisdom easy to come by? When do you refer to someone as having wisdom? What kind of person has wisdom? Well, many people would say somebody who's old. Unfortunately, this is not always true. Have you ever known of an older person who lacks wisdom? Stories of such people are unfortunately common. What does the wise person, whether older or younger, possess? Could somebody be wise without knowing how to live well? Perhaps. A person may live well globally, that is, live well in many ways of his or her life. A person also may live well just in perhaps one or two ways of his or her life. But a person who possesses wisdom is somebody who knows how to live well, whether globally, in all aspects of living. This is something we can all aspire to, and it's unfortunately rare, but it's certainly worth aiming at. Or somebody who knows how to live well a bit more narrowly. Either way, wisdom consists in the knowledge of how to live well. So the philosopher, the subject of philosophy, deals with the love of knowing how to live well. At this point, I would like to give you my basic definition of philosophy, such as it is studied in universities and practiced by philosophers, most of whom these days, not all of whom, but most of whom work within the contexts of colleges and universities. Okay, here we go. Philosophy is the discipline or practice of asking and rationally answering, or at least attempting to rationally answer, questions about three big topics. Number one, what is real? That is, what does reality consist in? Number two, what is knowledge? Not just what particular things do we know, but what makes knowledge knowledge? What are the standards of knowledge? And number three, how should we live? What should we do? These three areas are known, number one, as metaphysics, which is the area of philosophy that deals with questions of the nature of reality. Number two, epistemology, which is the area in philosophy that deals with questions of the nature of knowledge. Number three, and this is the one that most people are familiar with, ethics, the branch of philosophy that deals with questions of right and wrong, good and bad, and the correct ways of living. So once again, philosophy is the discipline or practice of asking and rationally answering questions about three big things. Number one, the nature of reality. Number two, the nature of knowledge. And number three, the nature of right and wrong. Of course, the discussion among philosophers is not limited only to talking specifically about metaphysics, specifically about epistemology, and specifically about ethics. There are many branches of philosophy, all of which have some reference point to one or more of the big three branches of philosophy to which I have just introduced you. So, for example, political philosophy, dealing with questions about the nature of society, is closely related to ethics. The philosophy of science would be related to both metaphysics and epistemology. The area of philosophy known as aesthetics, dealing with questions about art and beauty, is related, in my view, to all three: metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. Special sciences such as physics, biology, psychology usually have a philosophical branch that deals with them. So some people will speak of the philosophy of physics, which is going to have to be related to the philosophy of science, which is going to have to be related to metaphysics and epistemology. The same thing with the philosophy of biology or the philosophy of psychology. Other areas of philosophy would include Well, there's the philosophy of religion, of course, which deals with both metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. The philosophy of history. How do we think about the past? There are many others. For just about every area of inquiry, you will find philosophers interested in it. When I gave my basic definition of philosophy, notice that I specified that philosophers ask and rationally answer questions about X, Y, or Z. The rational answering is integral to philosophy. It is crucially important. It is by rationally answering questions that we seek wisdom, that philosophers seek wisdom. In giving rational answers, philosophers offer arguments. Philosophers give arguments for their views. Philosophers give arguments against opposing views. We need to talk about the word argument. In ordinary everyday understanding, the word argument connotes something very close to a fight with words. If I were to say to you, I was at the movies last night, and it was so annoying. There was this couple sitting in front of me, and they argued through the whole movie. What would you imagine? Probably you would imagine anger at one another. One person saying, "You're chumping your popcorn too loud, and I can't make out what they're saying in the movie." And the other could respond, "Well, we ordered this popcorn in order to eat it, and I'm eating it. So excuse me if my teeth and the popcorn make too much noise." Or one might say to the other, "Well, we always go to see the movies that you want, and this is the third movie we've gone to see in a row that you suggested. That's terrible. Next time I'm choosing the movie." And of course that can bring about some kind of irritated reaction on the part of the person who has just been accused of having crappy taste in movies. And then things can get really bad. Maybe the argument can get out of hand, and they start distracting other moviegoers, and then one member of the couple gets up and throws the popcorn down and stomps out of the room. This would be what most people would think of, stomps out of the theater. This would be what most people think of as an argument, some kind of contentious dispute where, when it gets bad, people are insulting one another. Then it can get even worse, and well, I suppose then it's no longer an argument, it's a fight when people start pushing and shoving. Nobody needs to be around that. But in ordinary everyday talk, an argument is generally thought to involve two or more people in some kind of angry, contentious dispute, perhaps raising their voices, perhaps cursing at one another, perhaps insulting one another. Well, the good news is this. In philosophy, an argument involves none of that. When philosophers engage in arguments with one another, there should be no raising of voices, there should be no cursing, there should be no insulting. So what do philosophers mean when they use the term argument? In a nutshell, an argument is offered any time a thinker gives reasons for his or her views. The reasons, known as premises, support the conclusions. In a philosophical argument, the person putting forth the argument is saying, either in writing or in speech, what he or she thinks is correct based on a given set of reasons. Here are my reasons, that is my premises, and here are my conclusions. The job of the reasons, or premises, is to justify the conclusions. An argument is a strong argument to the extent that the premises support the conclusions. Best case scenario, the premises necessitate the conclusions. That is, You can't believe the premises without also having to believe the conclusions. The premises make the conclusions necessary. An argument is logically strong to the extent that the premises support the conclusion effectively. An argument is logically weak to the extent that the premises fail to support the conclusion well. When reading philosophy, one always wants to be looking for the philosopher's argument, understanding which ideas are the philosopher's premises and how they work in the philosopher's attempt to justify his or her conclusion. With this orientation in philosophy, the use of argument offering premises to justify conclusions, we learn something very important about philosophy. A common misconception about what philosophers are doing is that they are offering us their opinions, and only their opinions. That is, a common misconception is that philosophers are offering us pure opinions. If they are giving their reasons for their views, they're attempting to convince us that what they think is correct. If they're attempting to convince us what they think is correct, then they are not just giving pure opinions. Philosophers are not giving pure opinions. If that's all philosophers were doing, then there would be no good reason to listen to them or to pay more attention to them than anybody else. A question that I've recently received in a class is this: well, what makes the philosopher different than just, some guy spouting off at the bar about some topic or other? The difference is that the guy at the bar, who's probably had one too many, is probably not giving reasons for his or her views. I suppose it would be his if it's the guy at the bar. The guy at the bar is probably not giving reasons for his views. Perhaps the guy at the bar is not doing much in order to be coherent, in order to make his or her views well supported. Philosophers, on the other hand, always have the responsibility to make their views as coherent as possible, to present their ideas such that their premises follow from their conclusions. And if they don't, well, they can always expect another philosopher to find the gaps, find the problems in their arguments, find the places where the premises don't support the conclusions very well. Much of the process of philosophy is like this. If this is how philosophy works, then philosophers are not just giving us their opinions. Philosophy is not just pure opinion. After all, if philosophy was just pure opinion, then we really wouldn't have a reason to have college classes about it. Opinions are really nothing special. Any view that a person holds should have no real claim on other people until they give reasons for it. When philosophers confront questions about the nature of reality, about the nature of knowledge, or about the nature of right and wrong, or any of the sub-areas of philosophical inquiry, they are not just telling you, this is what I think is true, and, well, you can think whatever else you want. When a philosopher offers his or her views supported by rational argument, the philosopher intends those views to be convincing. That is, the philosopher intends those views to transcend pure opinion. Philosophy is also not religion. There are, to be sure, philosophers who are religious, and there are philosophers who are not religious. But to the extent that philosophers are offering arguments for their views, they are not operating as religious people. Think carefully about what is the distinctive feature of religion. What do all religions share in common by which they are religion? One key factor that all religions share is faith. I'm not a theologian, I'm not an expert on religion, but the vast majority of religions that I can think of have a sacred text, have perhaps rites of passage, rituals that people celebrate at given times of year. If somebody does not celebrate a given ritual, or if somebody does not know the words of a sacred text, or has not followed all of the rites of passage, is that person likely to be kicked out of the house of worship? Probably not. On the other hand, consider a person who says the following: for my religion, I know the sacred text inside and out, and I've been through all the rituals, and I've observed all the holidays. But you know what? I don't believe a word of it. Now that person who lacks the fundamental belief in the truth of the sacred text, in the value of the rituals and the rites of passage, or lacks belief in what the rituals and rites of passage are intended to signify, that person is not truly of the religion. If a person lacks faith, one lacks religion entirely. That person can reasonably be said to be going through the motions and nothing more. What this shows is that faith is the decisive factor that makes religion religion. Certain religions almost value pure faith above all else. That is, a person of pure faith, one who just believes without having to ask any questions, go through any critical thinking processes, in some religions is considered to be the purest of the members of that religion. Philosophy, on the other hand, as I've now said a couple of times, rests upon the use of reason. It rests upon argument. A philosopher's views are only as strong as the arguments that the philosopher gives. And in philosophy, nothing is sacred. This is a key factor when we are thinking about philosophy. Nothing is sacred. All views are open to careful, critical analysis. Whereas in religion, to complete my contrast, there are certain ideas that are not open to discussion. To the extent that they are put forward as requirements, one must accept these views or one can have no part of the religion. They are non-negotiable. We have a major dividing point between philosophy and religion. Now, there are philosophers who are religious. There are philosophers who believe in God. But when they are operating as philosophers, they are offering reasons for their belief in God. They are not approaching God strictly as religious people. In fact, in the medieval era, in medieval European philosophy, which was dominated by Christianity, an important question that was discussed was the relationship between faith and reason. Philosophers understood that they needed to put reason first to the extent they were functioning as philosophers. When they reached a point where they were unwilling to put reason first, their use of reason, their use of philosophy, became a tool aiding their religious belief. In the words of one great philosopher, philosophy is the handmaiden of theology, which means this philosopher is functioning as a theologian first. In all of our analysis of texts and ideas, we will be looking at the reasons, the premises that philosophers give for their views, and we will not be treating any of them as sacred.